Hello everyone and welcome to the Ticker.com's news channel on YouTube. On this channel, we review stock markets and discuss financial news, market trends, and economic data from Wall Street to Global Street. So let's dive in. We begin our review of the global economy with key releases in the US, Europe, China, India, and Japan. Sellers gained upper hand on Wall Street and halted three-month rally amid rising trade tensions between the US and China, and investors rotating out of mega-cap stocks to small-cap and cyclical stocks. Let's begin our weekly review with the key economic data of the last week. U.S. retail and food services sales rose at the slowest pace in 3 months in June. Retail and food services sales, not adjusted for inflation, but adjusted for calendar, increased 2.3% in June, according to the monthly update released by the U.S. Census Bureau. May retail sales were upwardly revised to a 2.6% annual pace, but the sales increase in June slowed to a 3-month low. Retail sales strength and the expected rate cut in the next 3 months drove investors to consumer cyclical stocks, namely automobiles, housing, retail, and entertainment stocks, which rely on economic conditions. Across the Atlantic, the European Central Bank held its 3 key lending rates steady after lowering rates for the first time in June since 2016. The central bank held its main refinancing rate at 4.25% and deposit facility rate at 3.75% and the marginal lending rate at 4.5%. Policymakers have been reluctant to provide a future rate path outlook amid wage pressures as inflation remains above the 2% target rate set by the central bank. Bond traders are still looking for the ECB to lower rates by 25 basis points in September and again in October, but the rate outlook could change if energy prices rebound in the coming weeks. Passenger car registrations in the European Union increased 4.3% from a year ago in June, driven by an increase in 3 of the 4 largest markets in the region. Car registrations in Italy increased 15%, in Germany advanced 6%, in Spain gained 2%, but declined in France by 5%. Battery electric vehicle registration declined 1% to 156,400, driving the total market share down to 14.4% from 15.1% a year. In the first half of 2024, new car registrations in the European Union increased by 4.5% to nearly 5.7 million units. However, registration volumes remained 18% below pre-pandemic levels. Overall, consumer price inflation held steady at 2.8% in Japan, but the core rate of inflation accelerated for the second consecutive month to 2.6% amid the ending of energy subsidies and elevated food price inflation. Among other economic news around the world, the U.S. housing starts and completions in June were ahead of the market expectations. Eurozone trade surplus swung to a surplus in May from a deficit a year ago, and the region's current account surplus held steady in May. In Asia, China's second quarter GDP growth rate and retail sales in June were weaker than expected, highlighting weak consumer demand growth. Japan's trade surplus expanded in June after exports rose at a faster pace to the U.S. and China. India's consumer price inflation was near the upper end of the Reserve Bank of India's target range due to elevated food prices. Let us review key events in global bond, currency, and commodity markets last week. The yield on the 10-year U.S. Treasury stayed near 4.2% amid elevated expectations that the Federal Reserve is likely to start cutting rates as early as September. Texas crude oil declined 3% to $82 a barrel and declined for the second week in a row amid broad market weaknesses and rebound of the U.S. dollar. Natural gas prices in the Eurozone stabilized around €32 per megawatt hour, and traders monitor the progress in restarting the U.S. Freeport LNG terminals, where at least 7 shipments to Europe have been delayed following Hurricane Beryl. The euro eased from a 4-month high of $1.09 after European Central Bank held its key lending rate steady, and traders anticipated at least 2 more rate cuts this year. The Japanese yen traded below 158 against the U.S. dollar, and consumer price inflation held steady in June, but core inflation accelerated. We now shift our attention to major stock markets in the U.S., Europe, and Asia. The S&P 500 index and the Nasdaq Composite halted their 6-week rally as investors rotated from mega-cap stocks to small caps and cyclical companies. Moreover, chip stocks plunged as much as 10% on a news report that the U.S. is preparing to place severe curbs on companies sharing advanced semiconductor technology with China. European markets closed down amid mixed corporate results, rate path uncertainty, and rising trade tensions between the U.S. and China. The Nikkei 225 stock average declined the most in 3 months amid a sharp sell-off in chip equipment stocks. Hong Kong indices plunged nearly 5% in the week after policymakers' announcements following the third plenum underwhelmed financial markets. Indian market indices extended weekly gains to the 7th week in a row amid positive earnings from leading domestic corporations. Let's shift our attention to merger deals, market movers, and earnings update from leading companies last week. American Express Company, the payment processing and financial service company, reported better than expected revenue in the second quarter, but lifted annual earnings outlook. Netflix, the streaming service provider, reported better than expected revenue and earnings in the second quarter, but the company's revenue outlook for the third quarter fell short of some analyst expectations. CrowdStrike Holdings, after cybersecurity company said product update caused a global outage of information systems that impacted major airlines, banks, and other large corporations around the world. Taiwan Computer, advanced semiconductor maker, reported better than expected quarterly results and cited capacity constraints for its latest chip-making technology. Domino's Pizza plunged 12% after the pizza delivery company reported mixed second quarter results and abandoned its global new store estimates for the current quarter. Electrolux, the Swedish appliance maker, swung to a larger than expected profit in the second quarter. Danske Bank, the Danish bank, reported better than expected second quarter profit and said it plans to return 5.5 billion Danish kroner to shareholders later in the year. Infosys and the information service provider reported profit in the second quarter declined more than expected, and the profit fell 20% in the latest quarter. Allianz, the German insurance company, said it acquired a majority stake in Singapore-based income insurance for 1.6. Adidas, the sportswear maker, raised its annual outlook. Hugo Boss, the German fashion company, lowered its annual revenue outlook, citing a China-led slowdown. On the economic front, U.S. investors are looking ahead to the release of second quarter GDP growth rate with an estimate of 2%, faster than 1.4% rate in the first quarter. PCE price index, an alternative measure of inflation, is also expected to show a slight increase of 0.1% following a flat reading in May. On the earnings front, Microsoft, Coca-Cola, Tesla, Visa, UPS, IBM, AT&T, and ExxonMobil are scheduled to release their quarterly results this week. In Europe, France and Spain are scheduled to release jobs reports. The central banks of Russia, Hungary, and Turkey are set to announce their monetary policy decisions. In Asia, India is set to release its fiscal budget as investors look for growth in infrastructure spending and deficit targets amid a new coalition where the leading Bharatiya Janata Party, or BJP, has a smaller majority. The People's Bank of China is expected to hold its loan prime rate steady, and the Statistical Bureau is scheduled to release its foreign investment flow data for the first half. You can review daily U.S. and global financial market news, stock movers, earnings, releases, SEC filings, and economic updates on ticker.com and 123jump.com. You can find the latest financial books on Redera.com, keep up with financial industry events on eventsinamerica.com, review ETF and mutual fund performance and in-depth profiles on tickerfund.com, and review market updates and stock movers in India on niveshak.in. That is all for today, and we will see you